I never thought I'd be the kind of woman standing on a sidewalk at midnight with nothing but the clothes on my back and a small bag clutched against my chest. But there I was, trembling in the cold November air, watching the lights go off one by one in the house that used to be mine. The door had slammed so hard behind me that I felt it in my bones. Marcus's voice still echoed in my ears, the venom, the accusation, the finality of it. Get out. You're worthless. You've always been worthless. I should tell you how I got here. How a marriage that once felt like safety became a cage I didn't even realize I was locked inside. But maybe you already know. Maybe you've felt that slow suffocation too, where love turns into something unrecognizable and you start questioning your own sanity just to survive another day. Before I continue, if this story touches you in any way, consider subscribing. I really need to share this with someone. The thing about abuse is that it doesn't announce itself. It tiptoes in, wearing the mask of concern, of protection, of love that's just a little intense. Marcus didn't hit me, not with his fists anyway. He used words like weapons, silences like punishment, and control disguised as care. It started small, questions about where I'd been, who I'd talked to, then comments about my clothes, my weight, my laugh that was apparently too loud. Then isolation from friends who didn't really care about me anyway. By the time I realized what was happening, I had already lost so much of myself that I couldn't remember who I was before him. I met Marcus 6 years ago at a gallery opening. I was 27, working as a junior art curator, still grieving my father who had died 18 months earlier. Marcus was confident, successful, attentive in a way that felt like being seen after being invisible for so long. He asked about my work, my dreams, my father. He listened, or at least I thought he did. We married within a year. Looking back now, I can see how rushed it was, how he pushed for commitment before I'd fully processed my grief. But at the time, it felt like rescue, like someone was finally choosing me after a lifetime of feeling like an afterthought. My mother had left when I was 12, just disappeared one morning with a note on the kitchen counter that said she needed to find herself. My father raised me alone after that, working 2 jobs, making sure I had everything I needed except the one thing I wanted most, to feel chosen, to feel enough. Dad died of a heart attack while I was traveling for work. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I loved him one more time. And in the chaos of grief and guilt, I clung to Marcus like a lifeline. But I didn't realize lifelines could also be nooses. The first year of marriage was manageable. Marcus worked long hours at his consulting firm, and I buried myself in my career. We lived in a beautiful apartment in the city, went to the right restaurants, smiled in the right photos. From the outside, we looked perfect. But behind closed doors, something was shifting. He started criticizing the way I dressed for work. Too professional made me look uptight and cold. Too casual made me look sloppy and unprofessional. I could never find the balance, so I started asking his opinion before leaving the house. He seemed pleased by this, and I told myself it was partnership, not control. Then came the comments about my salary. I made decent money as a curator, but Marcus made more, significantly more. He started suggesting I didn't need to work so hard, that my job stressed me out, that maybe I should find something less demanding. When I resisted, he'd sigh and say he was only worried about my health, my happiness. The gaslighting started so subtly, I didn't even recognize it. He'd tell me I said things I had no memory of saying. He'd make plans and then insist I had forgotten we'd discussed changing them. He'd move my things and act confused when I couldn't find them, implying I was becoming forgetful, scattered, maybe even a little unstable. I started doubting everything: my memory, my perceptions, my own mind. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that this was all preparation, foundation laying for something much worse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 years into our marriage, Marcus suggested I quit my job. He'd just gotten a major promotion, and we were moving to a house in the suburbs. His dream, not mine. The commute would be difficult, he reasoned, and didn't I want to focus on us for a while? Maybe think about starting a family? I loved my work. The art, the research, the careful curation of exhibitions that told stories through objects and images. But I was so tired of fighting, tired of defending my choices, tired of feeling like I was failing at being a wife. So I agreed. I would take a break, just for a year or two. The house felt like a museum I was trapped inside. Beautiful, expensive, empty. Marcus worked longer hours than ever, and I found myself alone in rooms that echoed. I tried volunteering, taking online courses, maintaining friendships through phone calls and occasional lunches, but Marcus needed me home for dinner. Marcus didn't like when I made plans without consulting him first. Marcus thought my friends were negative influences. Slowly, carefully, he isolated me completely. But I didn't know the worst was still coming. I didn't know that every small surrender was a step toward the edge of a cliff I couldn't see yet. If you're still with me until here, thank you. And if you want to follow the rest, consider subscribing. By year 4, I barely recognized myself. I'd gained weight, comfort eating in the empty house. Marcus made sure I knew. He'd pat my stomach and joke about needing to get me back in shape. He'd compare me to women we saw at restaurants, on TV, in magazines. Never overtly cruel, always under the guise of concern or humor. But each comment landed like a small cut, and small cuts over time can bleed you dry. I tried to talk to him about how I felt, lonely, purposeless, unseen. He'd listen with this patient expression, then explain all the ways I was wrong. He provided for me, didn't he? He gave me a beautiful home, financial security, everything I needed. What more did I want? Why was I so ungrateful? I started therapy, secretly, using cash from grocery money I skimmed and saved. Dr. Chen was kind, patient, and the first person in years who made me feel like I wasn't crazy. She never told me to leave Marcus. She just asked questions that made me think, made me see patterns I'd been trained not to notice. "Does he ever apologize?" she asked once. I thought about it, really thought about it, and I realized, no, Marcus never apologized. If something went wrong, it was my fault for being too sensitive, for misunderstanding, for not communicating clearly enough. The problem was always me. "How do you feel when you're with him?" Dr. Chen asked another time. "Small," I whispered. "I feel small." That's when something began to shift, a tiny seed of awareness planted in soil I thought had gone barren. But awareness alone doesn't equal action. I still loved him, or what I remembered of loving him. I still hoped he'd become who I needed him to be. I still believed on some level that if I could just fix myself, we'd be okay. Then came last summer. Marcus started working late more frequently, 2, 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. When I called, he'd be short with me, distracted. When he came home, he'd shower immediately, saying the office air conditioning made him feel gross. He started password protecting his phone, something he'd never done before. I told myself it was work stress, a big project, corporate pressure. I told myself a lot of things to avoid the truth that was building like a storm on the horizon. One night in August, I couldn't sleep. Marcus was out late again, some client dinner he'd mentioned that morning. I lay in bed scrolling through my phone and accidentally clicked on his Instagram profile that I'd forgotten I'd bookmarked months ago. He'd posted a photo 3 hours earlier. He was at a rooftop bar, smiling broadly, his arm around a young woman in a red dress. The caption said, "Team celebrations with the best colleagues." She had tagged herself in the photo. Her name was Kelsey. My chest tightened. I clicked on her profile. It was public. And there, scattered among her photos from the last 6 months, were multiple images with Marcus, at restaurants, at the beach, at what looked like a weekend trip to wine country. In several photos, they were standing very close. In one, his hand was on the small of her back. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. This couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be an explanation. They worked together. They were friends. Colleagues. Nothing more. But then I saw a photo from 2 weeks ago, a time when Marcus had told me he was at a regional conference. The photo showed Kelsey and Marcus in front of a hotel, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them looking relaxed and happy in casual clothes. The geotag said Lake Tahoe. The caption said, "Best weekends." I felt like I was falling through the bed, through the floor, through the earth itself. Marcus came home around 2 a.m. I was still awake, sitting in the dark kitchen, the photos on my phone screen like evidence I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. "Why are you up?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Who's Kelsey?" The pause was infinitesimal, but I caught it. A flicker of something across his face before the mask settled back into place. "A coworker." "Why?" "You've been spending a lot of time with her." "That's part of my job, Sarah. We work on the same accounts." His voice was patient, condescending. "Are you really going to start this jealous wife routine? I thought you were better than that." And just like that, he turned it on me. My legitimate concern became my insecurity, my paranoia, my failure to trust him. We argued until dawn, or rather, I questioned and he deflected, denied, minimized, blamed. By the time the sun came up, I almost believed I'd imagined the whole thing, that I was overreacting, that I was the problem. Almost. But something had cracked open inside me. A small voice that Dr. Chen had helped me find was whispering, "You're not crazy. You know what you saw." I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. And once you start seeing, you can't unsee. The way he angled his phone away from me, the new cologne, the gym membership he suddenly started using religiously, the careful grooming, the new clothes, the way he seemed lighter, happier, but only when he was about to leave the house. When he was home with me, he was irritable, critical, distant. But his phone would light up with messages, and he'd smile at the screen in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. I couldn't confront him again without proof. He'd just make me feel crazy, paranoid, controlling. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until he was in the shower one morning and checked his phone. His passcode was our wedding anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. The messages with Kelsey went back 8 months, hundreds of them. "I miss you. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." She doesn't suspect anything. Photos, videos, plans for secret meetings, discussions about leaving their respective partners. Marcus was planning to leave me, but timing had to be right because of finances, because he needed to protect his assets. I was an asset problem, an obstacle to be managed. I took photos of everything with my own phone, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. Then I put his phone back exactly where I'd found it and went to the bathroom to vomit. That was 2 months ago. 2 months of living with this knowledge, planning my exit, seeing Dr. Chen twice a week instead of once, secretly consulting with a lawyer, opening a separate bank account that Marcus didn't know about, preparing myself for what had to come next. But life has a way of making decisions for you when you wait too long to make them yourself. 3 nights ago, Marcus came home late again. I was in bed, pretending to sleep. I heard him moving around downstairs, heard his voice talking to someone on the phone, her, presumably. I heard him laugh, that genuine laugh I used to think was reserved for me. When he finally came to bed, he smelled like her perfume. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. The next morning, I woke up resolved. Today would be the day I confronted him. Today I would tell him I knew everything, that I'd seen the messages, that I'd already talked to a lawyer. Today I would start reclaiming my life. But when I went downstairs, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression on his face, triumph mixed with disgust. "I know about your secret bank account," he said. His voice was cold, flat. "Did you really think you could hide that from me? Do you know how that makes me look? Like I'm not providing for you? Like you need to sneak around behind my back?" My lawyer had suggested the account, a safety net for women leaving controlling relationships. But somehow Marcus had found out. Maybe he'd been monitoring my email, my search history. I didn't know. What I knew was that his expression was frightening in its intensity. "Marcus, I can explain. You've been planning to leave me." It wasn't a question. After everything I've given you, after I rescued you from that pathetic little life you were living, this is how you repay me? The conversation spiraled fast. I tried to stay calm, tried to bring up Kelsey, the affair, his lies, but he didn't deny any of it. Instead, he turned it into my fault. If I'd been a better wife, more attractive, more attentive, less needy, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. And then he said the words that would change everything. "This is my house. My money paid for everything you're wearing, everything you're touching. You want to leave? Fine. Get out, right now. You can take what you came with, nothing." "Marcus, please." "I said get out." His voice was a roar that seemed to shake the walls. "You ungrateful, pathetic bitch. Get the fuck out of my house before I call the police and have you removed." I should have fought harder. I should have known my rights. But in that moment, I was so conditioned to obey him, so worn down by years of psychological abuse, that I just complied. I grabbed my purse, threw some clothes into a bag, and left. And that's how I ended up on the sidewalk at midnight, homeless and broken and wondering how my life had come to this. I had no family. My mother was gone, my father was dead. My friends had drifted away during my marriage, and the few who remained lived too far away or had their own struggles. I had $247 in my secret bank account and nowhere to go. I sat on a bench in a park 3 blocks from the house, the cold seeping through my coat, and cried until I had nothing left. Then I pulled out my wallet to count the cash I had on me, maybe enough for a few nights at a cheap motel while I figured out my next move. That's when I saw it, tucked behind my driver's license, bent and worn, a bank card I'd forgotten I had, my father's card. After Dad died, I'd found this card in his wallet among his personal effects. The lawyer handling his estate had told me to destroy it, that his accounts had been closed, that it was just a piece of plastic with no value. But I couldn't bring myself to cut it up. It was one of the last physical objects he'd touched, and in my grief, I'd slipped it into my wallet where it had stayed for the last 6 years, a talisman of a love I'd lost. I turned it over in my hands, remembering my father. How different he'd been from Marcus, how he'd encouraged my dreams, celebrated my achievements, never made me feel small, how he'd worked himself to exhaustion to give me opportunities, to make sure I knew I was valued and loved. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that this forgotten piece of plastic was about to crack open secrets that had been buried for decades. In my desperation, probably because I was exhausted and not thinking clearly, I decided to try it. Maybe there was still $5 on it. Maybe the account hadn't been closed properly. Maybe I'd get lucky. There was a 24-hour convenience store a block away. I went inside, bought a bottle of water, and with trembling hands, I swiped my father's card. The machine beeped. Processing, and then approved. I stared at the receipt. The transaction had gone through, but that was impossible. The account should have been closed years ago. Something was wrong. Or something was very, very right. I left the store and sat on the curb, the card clutched in my hand, my mind racing. In the morning, I would go to the bank. I would find out what was happening. Maybe it was an error. Maybe it was nothing. But maybe, just maybe, my father had left me one more gift, one more way of taking care of me, even from beyond the grave. I slept that night in my car, an old Honda I'd kept from before the marriage that Marcus had always mocked but never made me get rid of. It was uncomfortable and cold, but it was mine. The first thing that had been truly mine in years. At 9 a.m., I was standing outside the main branch of Pacific Trust Bank when the doors opened. My hair was a mess, I was wearing yesterday's clothes, and I probably looked as desperate as I felt. But I walked up to the customer service desk and asked to speak to someone about my father's account. The woman at the desk, her name tag said Jennifer, typed something into her computer. Her expression changed. She looked up at me with new interest. "Can you wait here for a moment?" she asked, her voice suddenly formal. 10 minutes later, I was being escorted to a private office on the 3rd floor. Not a cubicle, not a desk in the open floor plan. A private office with a door that closed and windows that looked out over the city. The man who greeted me was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, his handshake firm and his expression carefully neutral. His business card said Michael Thornton, Senior Private Client Manager. "Ms. Sarah Chen," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Thank you for coming in. We've been trying to reach you for quite some time." My last name was still Chen, my father's name. I'd never taken Marcus's surname, one small rebellion I'd managed to hold on to. "Trying to reach me?" I repeated, confused. "About what?" "About your father's account, the one connected to the card you used last night." "That card should have been canceled," I said. "When my father died 6 years ago, his estate lawyer said, 'The card you have is not connected to your father's standard checking account,'" Mr. Thornton interrupted gently. "That account was indeed closed. This card accesses a different account entirely, a private account that has been maintained under very specific instructions." My heart started beating faster. "I don't understand." Mr. Thornton opened a file on his desk, thick, official-looking. "Your father, Mr. David Chen, established a discretionary trust account in 1998, the year you were born. It was designed to mature and become accessible only under certain conditions. The primary condition being documented evidence of significant life hardship or emergency." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Your transaction last night triggered an automatic alert. When a card hasn't been used in 6 years and suddenly shows activity at midnight from a location far from your registered address, our security protocols flag it. But when we investigated, we realized what had happened. Your father's instructions were very clear. If you ever needed to use this card, we were to contact you immediately." "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, afraid to hope. Mr. Thornton looked at me with something like compassion. "Ms. Chen, your father's trust account currently holds approximately $2.8 million. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling. "That's impossible," I said. "My father was a maintenance worker. He had 2 jobs just to pay the bills. He didn't have money. We lived paycheck to paycheck." "Your father made some very wise investments in the early days of tech stocks," Mr. Thornton explained. "He bought shares in several companies that became extremely valuable. Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. He started with small amounts, but held on to them for decades. Additionally, he was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy we weren't aware of until after his death, a policy his own father had taken out years earlier. All of that money, every cent, went into this trust for you." Tears were streaming down my face. Why didn't he tell me? Why did we struggle if he had this money? According to his instructions, the money was never for day-to-day life. It was for emergencies, for education, for your future. He wanted you to learn the value of work, of earning your own way, but he also wanted to make sure you were protected if something happened to him or if you ever found yourself in serious trouble. The trust was structured so that you'd gain full access at 35 or earlier if circumstances warranted. Your transaction last night, combined with the fact that you're clearly not at your registered address, triggered those emergency provisions. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. My father, who I thought had left me nothing but memories and a worn-out card, had been protecting me all along. Even in death, even across years of silence, he'd found a way to catch me when I fell. "There's more," Mr. Thornton said quietly. "Your father left detailed letters for you. He wrote them over the years and left them in our care. Would you like to read them now, or would you prefer some time? Now, I said immediately. Please. He handed me a sealed envelope, weathered and yellowed at the edges. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting, and just seeing those familiar loops and curves broke something open inside me. I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you've needed to access this account. It means life has thrown something at you that you couldn't handle on your own, and I'm sorry I'm not there to help you through it in person. I set this money aside the day you were born. I looked at your tiny face and made a promise that no matter what happened, you'd have a foundation to stand on, that you'd never be trapped by poverty or desperation the way I was when I was young, that you'd have choices. I didn't tell you about this because I wanted you to build your own life first, to discover your own strength, to know you could survive on your own merit. But I also wanted you to have a safety net for when survival wasn't enough, for when you needed to escape, to start over, to reclaim yourself. I hope that whatever brought you here isn't too painful. But if it is, if someone has hurt you, controlled you, made you feel small, know this: you are not small. You are magnificent. You are strong enough to rebuild. And you have resources now to do it on your terms. Use this money wisely. Use it to create the life you deserve. Use it to remember that you are loved, even from beyond death. I'm always with you, sweetheart, always protecting you, even when you can't see me. Be brave, be free, be yourself. All my love, Dad. I folded the letter against my chest and sobbed. Not delicate tears, but huge, wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of me. Grief and relief and gratitude and rage and hope all mixed together until I couldn't tell where one emotion ended and another began. Mr. Thornton quietly left the room, giving me privacy. When I finally composed myself enough to breathe normally, he returned with water and tissues and a gentle patience that made me want to cry all over again. What happens now? I asked. Now we transfer the account fully into your name. You'll have immediate access to all funds. I'd recommend meeting with our financial advisors to discuss investment strategies, but that's entirely up to you. The money is yours to use as you see fit. That afternoon, I walked out of Pacific Trust Bank a different person than I'd been when I walked in. I had a new bank card, access to resources I'd never dreamed of, and something far more valuable: proof that I was loved, that I had value, that I was worth protecting. The first thing I did was check into a nice hotel. Not extravagant, but clean and safe and mine. I took a shower that lasted an hour, washing away Marcus, the abuse, the fear. Then I ordered room service and ate slowly, savoring every bite, marveling at the simple pleasure of making a choice without needing anyone's permission. The second thing I did was call my lawyer. With my new financial situation, I could afford proper legal representation. I could fight for what was legally mine from the marriage, community property, settlement, all of it. Marcus had thrown me out, assuming I was powerless. He had no idea what was coming. The third thing I did was call Dr. Chen and tell her everything. She listened, and when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. Your father gave you resources, but you gave yourself courage. Don't forget that. The money matters, but what matters more is that you were already planning to leave. You were already fighting for yourself. He just made it easier. She was right. The money was a gift, a miracle, a blessing. But the strength to recognize I deserved better, that had come from me. From months of therapy, painful realizations, and the slow rebuilding of a self I'd thought was lost. Over the next 2 weeks, everything happened quickly. My lawyer sent Marcus divorce papers. His shock was palpable. He'd expected me to come crawling back, begging for another chance. Instead, he got served with legal documents outlining exactly how much he was going to pay for the community property he'd seized, for my lost wages from the career he'd convinced me to abandon, for everything. He tried to fight it. He tried to claim I'd hidden assets, that I'd been planning this all along, that the trust was somehow marital property. But my lawyer was excellent, and the law was clear. The trust had been established before our marriage and was my separate property, and his affair with Kelsey, which I had documented thoroughly, meant he had far less leverage than he thought. Kelsey, I learned, had her own surprises waiting. She'd thought Marcus was wealthier than he actually was. When she realized he'd be losing money in the divorce, her enthusiasm waned quickly. They were still together, last I heard, but the shine had worn off their forbidden romance now that it was no longer forbidden or funded by what he'd taken from me. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wanted what was mine: my dignity, my freedom, my life. I found a small apartment in the city near my old gallery. It wasn't fancy, but it had good light and high ceilings and space for me to breathe. I bought a few pieces of furniture, hung art on the walls, and filled the rooms with plants. I made it mine. Then I did something I'd been too afraid to do for years. I reached out to my old boss at the gallery. She remembered me. More than that, she'd been disappointed when I'd left. She had an opening for a senior curator position, and would I be interested? Would I be interested? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. I started working again 3 months after leaving Marcus. Walking into the gallery that first day felt like coming home after a long exile. My hands remembered how to handle art carefully. My mind remembered how to craft narratives. My heart remembered what it felt like to do something I loved. My colleagues were wonderful, talented, passionate people who treated me as an equal, who valued my input, who never made me feel small. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be respected. Slowly, carefully, I rebuilt friendships I'd neglected. I called people I'd lost touch with and apologized for disappearing. Most of them understood. Some had been in similar situations. They welcomed me back with open arms and stories of their own. I continued therapy with Dr. Chen. The work wasn't finished just because my circumstances had improved. I had years of trauma to process, patterns to unlearn, beliefs about myself to reshape. But now I had the resources and the space to do that work properly. I learned things about myself I'd forgotten. I liked hiking. I was funny when I wasn't monitoring every word for potential criticism. I had opinions about art and politics and life that were valid and interesting. I could make decisions without seeking permission. I could exist without apologizing for taking up space. 6 months after leaving Marcus, the divorce was finalized. I got a fair settlement, enough to compensate for the career years I'd lost, for the community property I was owed. Combined with my father's trust, I had financial security for the first time in my life. But more importantly, I had myself back. I went to my father's grave for the first time since the funeral. I'd avoided it for years, too painful, too raw. But now I needed to say thank you. "You saved me, Dad," I whispered, kneeling on the grass in front of his headstone. "You saved me, and I didn't even know I needed saving yet. But somehow, you knew. You always knew." The wind rustled through the trees, and I felt something like peace settle over me. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing the worst is over, and what's ahead, whatever it holds, is yours to shape. I thought about my mother sometimes. The woman who'd left when I was 12, who'd chosen herself over me in a way that had scarred me for life. I understood her better now. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes people are drowning and they leave behind everyone who loves them just to find air. The difference was that I'd found air without abandoning anyone. I'd saved myself, yes, but I'd done it with my eyes open, with help from people who cared, with resources my father had provided even in death. I wasn't alone the way she must have been. And maybe that was the greatest gift. Not the money itself, but the proof that I was worth saving. Worth protecting. Worth fighting for. 1 year after that midnight moment on the sidewalk, I was sitting in my apartment surrounded by friends, celebrating my birthday. 34 years old, single, employed, happy, or at least on the path to happiness. Someone asked me about dating, if I was ready to try again. I laughed and said no, not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I was enjoying my own company too much, learning who I was without someone else's voice in my head telling me who I should be. But I didn't say never. That was growth too, believing that someday I might trust again, might love again, might open my heart to someone who would treat it with the care it deserved. I thought about that word often. Deserve. Marcus had spent years convincing me I deserved nothing. Not respect, not kindness, not love, not even basic human dignity. Unlearning that had been the hardest work of my life. But I was doing it. Day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment, I was reclaiming what he'd tried to take from me. My story isn't unique. Thousands of women live through versions of what I experienced. The details differ. Some face physical violence, some psychological torture, some both. Some have resources to escape, some don't. Some make it out, some don't. I made it out because my father gave me a ladder when I needed one. But I climbed that ladder myself. No one could have done it for me. And now, standing on solid ground for the first time in years, I could see the path ahead clearly. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without pain or setbacks or moments of doubt. But it was mine. That was enough. That was everything. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me through the pain and the revelation and the slow climb back to myself. If this resonates with you, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, know that you're not alone. Know that there is life after abuse. There is strength you haven't discovered yet. There are resources you might not know about. There are people who will help you climb when you're ready. And if you're not ready yet, that's okay too. I wasn't ready for a long time. But when you are, when that moment comes where you know you can't continue as you have been, there will be a ladder waiting. Maybe it's a father's trust account. Maybe it's a friend's spare room. Maybe it's a therapist who helps you see clearly. Maybe it's your own strength that you finally recognize as real. Whatever it is, it will be enough. You will be enough. You always were. Thank you for staying with me through this. If you want to walk with me through more stories, the difficult ones, the beautiful ones, the ones that hurt and heal, subscribe. Your company matters more than you know.